Viewers like you make this program possible. Support your local PBS station.
Every day, history is traded all over the world. Poignant, bizarre, and unique items that may never have been seen in public before. A fascinating and often untold tale lies behind every object.
It looks pretty gruesome, but actually the reality behind it is probably far more gruesome than the object itself.
This may be our last chance to see them before they disappear forever into private collections. Our quest? To unearth extraordinary objects drawn from every corner of the world and reveal the amazing hidden histories behind them.
My father was shot down by this man at Schnaufer. His plane is right at the top, the 29th of June, 1943.
On this episode of Trading History, the personal story behind the sinking of the Nazis' biggest battleship.
It says, located German battleship Bismarck, attacked by anti-aircraft fire. It's one of the greatest battles in the Second World War.
Rare royal treasure is unearthed for the first time in nearly 200 years.
Royalty collecting, the monarch is top trump.
This is such an exciting find.
And we discover the incredible true story of one man's part in the struggle for Irish independence.
People have been trying to unravel what actually happened for the past 100 years. Here's a bit of history to unravel it.
In southwest England, auctioneer Oliver Halford is preparing to sell an extraordinary collection of World War II memorabilia that's never before come onto the open market.
Very special lot, this one. Group of medals, including a logbook. Where should we start the bin?
The collection, which includes a certificate for outstanding service and 7 medals, all belong to Flight Sergeant Frederick Cecil Davis.
A lovely group of medals, the Defence Medal and War Medal with the oak leaf, which means mentioned in dispatches, so they've done something exciting in the war.
The clue to what that was lies within the pages of this, his flight logbook.
It's just an amazing piece to have.
The highly decorated air gunner joined the RAF in 1938, a year before war broke out in Europe. He served on the American-designed Catalina seaplanes, and his flight logbook documents his many dangerous sorties.
We can see that he's done convoy escorts, anti-submarine searches in the Atlantic.
But one mission stands out above them all.
It says, located German battleship Bismarck, attacked by anti-aircraft fire. It's one of the greatest battles in the Second World War.
The Bismarck represented a threat to Britain's sea lines of communication. It represented a threat to Britain's ability to import foodstuffs and war material, which would allow Britain to continue to fight the war.
It had all started in September 1939, when German soldiers marched into Poland.
Precisely at dawn on September 1st, without warning, the German Wehrmacht rolled over the Polish border.
Hitler's refusal to withdraw his invading army forced Britain to declare war, and so began 6 years of global conflict. Meanwhile, in the heart of Germany, Hitler was building a super warship, the Bismarck, the largest battleship of her type in the world.
Britain is a maritime nation, and the Bismarck represents a threat to that ability for Britain to carry on fighting the war.
In 1941, the feared 50,000-ton hulk headed for the Atlantic to disrupt essential supplies from America. HMS Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy, stood in its way.
She was a symbol of Britain's invincible sea power. And now she was at the bottom of the cold waters between Iceland and Greenland, sent there by the guns of the giant Bismarck.
Enraged, Britain marshalled all its remaining air and sea power, their mission to hunt down and destroy the Bismarck.
The order went out, sink her at any cost.
Spearheading the search were 6 Catalinas, American military seaplanes designed for long-range operations and purchased by Britain in 1939, 2 years before the US entered the war. In the thick fog of the Atlantic, Bismarck was hard to find.
During the course of the search for the Bismarck, number 209 Squadron operating out in Northern Ireland eventually discovers the Bismarck and allows the Royal Navy to re-engage with the Bismarck.
Catalina Flying Officer Dennis Briggs takes up the story.
She was only a dull black shape at first, so we had to come closer. But unfortunately, the cloud ended right over the ship, and we got everything she'd got in the way of anti-aircraft.
As Briggs's Catalina limped away, the remaining seaplanes took up the chase. Flight Sergeant Davis was in one of them, and his logbook describes what happened next.
They managed to shadow for 5 hours, contacted 3 enemy aircrafts, which they managed to fight off. They were attacked by anti-aircraft fire.
Meanwhile, the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal and the might of the British Navy were mobilised.
Navigators plotted the position given by the Catalina's crew. Britain closed in for the kiss.
Biplane torpedo bombers led the assault on Bismarck. Then came the pounding from the Navy. Britain showed no mercy.
So was shattered Hitler's dream. Britain had maintained her supremacy in the North Atlantic.
Some 2,000 German crew lost their lives.
It was important to sink the Bismarck, not only because it represented a clear and present danger to Britain's ability to fight the war, but that it was also representative of German military might in 1941, and by defeating it would help boost morale on the home front.
The events of that day have gone down in history, making Cecil Davis's flight logbook even more valuable now.
The mention of the Bismarck and its importance as a key point in the history of the Second World War gives the item a degree of provenance and is a documentary artefact related to the history of this important event.
A group of medals, including a logbook. They followed the Bismarck for 5 hours. A very, very interesting lot here.
At auction, the book went to a private collector. For a brief moment, we got to encounter the World War experience of Flight Sergeant Cecil Davis and the important role he played in defeating the might of the German enemy. We are lucky in the 21st century that so much of our recent history has been recorded for posterity.
Joy and jubilation flow unrestrained in London. The Queen is crowned.
When items from this time are discovered, these old recordings and photographs give us an opportunity to verify provenance and give an intimate glimpse into another private world, one we can only imagine, and that sometimes takes on a more sinister side. The paparazzi, like bees to honey, drawn to capturing the vulnerable moments of the rich, the famous, and those about to be.
What they want is an unguarded moment, a moment that no one else has, a secret moment. They want to catch people unawares.
Is there any comment to make about that? Okay. Going to work now, okay?
Whilst papping public figures may be a relatively recent development, attempts to catch their less formal private moments have been around for decades. Astonishingly, the early champions of this style were the royals themselves. The parents of Queen Elizabeth used photos of their young family to help transform the stuffy image of the monarchy.
The Duchess, who is devoted to her family, and the Duke in particular, they wanted to have a very modern idea of family, and this is exactly what these photos convey. They're relaxed, they're fun, and if you didn't know who it was, you wouldn't think this was a princess.
These photos are some of the earliest snaps taken of the young Elizabeth, born in 1926, and are among a rare collection of work by royal photographer Marcus Adams, being sold by auctioneer Chris Albury.
That is one of the privileges of the job, to know that you're holding this piece of history, this photograph of the Queen. And there's a newspaper reproduction from a Marcus Adams photograph of the Queen, aged 15 months. And here she's got a little rattle. And if you want to come with me, I'll show you something. And here it is, Elizabeth's bell.
The rattle is part of a bigger collection of items being auctioned off by Adams' descendants. But it's the photographs of the royal family that are the most prized. Born in 1875, Adams spent decades building a reputation in child portraiture.
Where he's particularly good is getting photography of children. He becomes particularly renowned for being firstly the royal photographer and also for being someone who took great photos of children.
It was Adams' ability to work with youngsters that got him the most important job of his career. In 1926, the Duke and Duchess of York commissioned him to take the first photographs of their newborn daughter, Princess Elizabeth. That was the start of a long association with the royal family. Marcus Adams' ability to capture his royal subjects at ease was in sharp contrast to the stuffy, formal poses common at the time.
Now we'd see these photos as really very formal, but in the 1920s, this is a very informal snap. It's the equivalent of being caught in motion.
This more relaxed style was also due to Elizabeth's royal status at the time.
She wasn't the heir to the throne, so there wasn't a reason to take lots and lots of photos of her, because simply she was destined for a good marriage and a happy life. There was no way anyone thought she would ever be queen.
And those early Adams photos bear witness to that.
We've got Queen Mary and Princess Elizabeth, 1926, taken during the first sitting at Bruton Street, when, of course, Edward VIII was in line to the throne, so it wasn't expected that they were going to become the Queen of the country.
Then, in 1936, everything changed. Princess Elizabeth's uncle, Edward VII, abdicated over his love for American socialite and twice divorcee, Wallis Simpson.
You all know the reasons which have impelled me to renounce the throne.
Handing the crown to her father, the Duke of York. Not only did the abdication change the course of royal history, it suddenly put Elizabeth directly in line to the throne.
1936 was tumultuous for the country, it changed the royal family, but it had the greatest impact on this little girl who suddenly realised, one day I'll be queen.
Overnight, this seismic event was to fuel a new interest in Elizabeth's image. So when she became queen in 1953, everything connected to her, including Adams' photos, became highly sought after.
Elizabeth is wedded to her empire. Thus she ascends to a throne that links 600 million subjects in all corners of the globe.
Photographs of the royals are very desirable, particularly photos of their childhood, because they are very prized. They simply aren't published, they simply aren't given out. Royals like to keep their children as private as possible.
If they're a monarch, they are collectible because people are interested in monarchs, whether it's Henry VIII, Elizabeth I or Queen Elizabeth II. If they're not a monarch, then there is potentially a lot less interest. Poor Prince Charles is rather uncollected, and contrary to most rules, it's his first wife, Princess Diana, who is very collectible, and Charles isn't.
The impact Princess Diana had on the world's media in the 1980s redefined the landscape of royal photography forever.
She was a completely new breath of fresh air, and she was the one whose photo was on the front of every magazine, every newspaper. Also, her marriage pretty much coincided with the burst of print media, the burst of 24-hour news, so we saw Diana absolutely everywhere. And it's the first time really when youth and beauty completely supersede the notion of royal precedence and royal hierarchy. She really became the most significant, most photographed, most thought about, most copied royal.
Portrait photographer Marcus Adams died in 1959, and during his lifetime succeeded in changing the way we see the royal family. By the Diana era, that style had moved from the studio to the street as the public clamoured to see the more human side of their royals. It may well be that those early informal royal photos that turned out to be the catalyst for the royal pap snaps we see today.
So the paparazzi and the portrait photographer couldn't be more different, but yet at the same time, what we see here with the informality, with the relaxed nature of Adam's portraits, is the notion of an open monarchy, is the notion of monarchy that are just like us. And if they're just like us, they can be snapped in all kinds of situations, some of them compromising, some of them not.
This never-before-seen archive of work by photographer Marcus Adams shows the royal family in a unique light. Now it's been sold to the Royal Collection Trust for safekeeping, in this enduring tale of trading history. They say that every object tells a story. You've just got to dig for it. This object is part of the very fabric of a nation's history. It's a story of personal tragedy, political intrigue, and the deaths of thousands of people. Ireland and the coast of Kerry. It's Good Friday, 1916, and the weather is closing in.
It was very rough that night, and the boat capsized.
Within hours of nightfall, this beach was to witness an event that was to change the course of Irish history.
You know, the boat was spotted very quickly, and that's really what gave them away.
The tragedy came just days before the Easter Rising, a deadly moment in Ireland's past when nationalists rose up against British rule established by the Act of Union in 1800. The effect of this political alliance on the Irish was profound. Anti-Catholic laws and Britain's reluctance to help during the devastating 1840s potato famine saw many flee to America in search of a better life. Today, many Americans of Irish descent still celebrate their ancestry every year on March the 17th, St. Patrick's Day. Those who remained in Ireland in the 19th century saw the tension between the Irish and British continue, coming to a head in the Easter Rising of 1916. The true story of what happened that Easter and the subsequent execution of a Knight of the Realm has remained a secret until now.
People have been trying to unravel what actually happened over the past 100 years. Here is a piece of the jigsaw that will complete the puzzle.
It turns out the contents of this slip of paper could have changed the course of Irish history. It's been unearthed by auctioneer Simon Chorley and holds the key to how British diplomat Roger Casement came to be tried for treason. Dublin-born Casement spent some 20 years as a British consul, being knighted in 1911 for his humanitarian services to the Empire. But his dislike for colonialism matched a growing interest in Irish republicanism. After his retirement, Casement poured his energies into helping form the Irish Volunteers, a military organisation later known as the IRA. By 1916, feelings were running high among the nationalists for their own independent state.
Their feelings were raw. They were rising against the tyranny of the British government. They felt time was ripe. Now is the time to act and be counted. They thought if they all met in the General Post Office in Sackville Street in Dublin, they could stop communications going out. They were going to arm an awful lot of people with weapons they hoped would have come from Germany.
At the time, Britain was at war with the Germans. Casement hoped by going to Germany, he could secure thousands of guns and ammunition to fight their mutual enemy. On April 9th, 1916, in the hope an Irish rebellion would distract the British fighting on the Western Front, Germany sent a shipment of 25,000 guns. But it wasn't enough.
You see, Casement felt that unless there were sufficient arms and men being sent by Germany, that the uprising would be crushed.
Casement and his two co-conspirators hurried back from Germany to the west coast of Ireland under cover of a German U-boat. Their mission? To head for Dublin, 200 miles away, to warn the rebels and insurgents was doomed. But fortune was against them. It was the early hours of Good Friday, 3 days before the uprising. The location? Bannerstrand, County Kerry, Ireland. The three men left the U-boat in a dinghy and headed for shore. It was the final stage of Casement's fateful journey.
It took them about 2 hours to get into the Strand. It was very rough that night as well, and the boat capsized. They were completely and totally drenched, absolutely drenched. They were trying to sink the boat, but they couldn't, so they just left the boat bobbing in the water.
It was to be their undoing. By 3:30 that morning, things had gone from bad to worse.
They headed across country. There was a quicker route, but they took the wrong route, and they ended up going through marshy ground and got even more cold and tired. And at that stage, Casement was really suffering. So the other two decided that the best thing to do was to find him shelter somewhere. So they found a ring fort enclosed by a ditch, and there he took shelter.
Here, Casement hoped to remain hidden, but it was not to be.
Word had gotten out that a boat had been found on the beach, guns, a dagger, various different things were found on the beach, and so the police made for the fort, and there they found Casement.
Casement was arrested and sent to London, and the German shipment of arms intercepted by British intelligence. On Easter Monday, the 24th of April 1916, the Irish volunteers rose up against the British and proclaimed Ireland an independent state. But without German guns and munitions, the odds were against them.
It was complete shambles. The fighting went on in O'Connell Street for, I think, 5 days, after which the whole place had been desecrated and a lot of people had lost their lives. They weren't soldiers. They were just people wanting independence.
So where does this map fit into the extraordinary events of the Easter Rising? The answer lies in Kerry County Museum. Curator Helen O'Carroll believes the map was the work of Roger Casement.
This one was the very first sketch map he drew after he was arrested, after he'd been brought to London. It's hard to describe how fantastic it is, how important it is, and how significant it is. The sketch map is a pencil sketch, very hurriedly drawn, and it's showing the spot where he had hidden money in the ring fort, very close to the beach where the three men had landed that morning. £50 in gold and silver coins, so it's quite a substantial amount of money. And when he got to Scotland Yard, he drew the sketch and gave it to his interrogators to say, look, I've hidden money in this fort. Could you please arrange for the local police to see if they can find the money?
Casement desperately needed it to fund his defence against a charge of treason, punishable by death.
The local police were sent out to look for the money, and they reported back that no, actually they hadn't found it.
That sealed Casement's fate. 4 months after the events at Bannerstrand, and with insufficient funds to defend himself, he was convicted of treason, sabotage and espionage, and executed at Pentonville Prison. But that wasn't the end of Casement's story. His crude map disappeared from view, only to surface again 100 years later at this auction house. And with it came one final twist in this extraordinary tale, the answer to what happened to Casement's buried money.
Equally as interesting as the sketch map itself is the little note here at the side. And the note was written by one of Casement's interrogators, Frank Hall.
So Hall, a member of the British Secret Service and Casement's interrogator, knew the police in Ireland had stolen the money, but said nothing.
Frank Hall had kept this. It was in his family for 100 years. Nobody knew where the sketch had gone to. And then, you know, out of the blue, it turns up at auction. And in the little note, it tells you that the money had indeed been found, and it actually had been divided up amongst the police officers who had arrested Casement. They had actually found the money. They lied about it.
Roger Casement, knighted for his humanitarian services to the Empire, but finally hanged for treason at the age of 51. His story was to fan the flames of Irish republicanism for decades to come.
Because of the way the British authorities reacted to the Rising with the executions and mass arrests. By the time of Casement's execution in August 1916, there would have been real anti-British feeling as a result of it, you know. And it really shows how completely divided Ireland and Britain had become at that stage. In Britain, Casement was a traitor, hanging was almost too good for him, he should be put up against a wall and shot. In Ireland, he had now become a martyr to the cause, like the others who had died and had been executed in the Rising.
While these two pieces of paper may appear unassuming, their significance is far-reaching. Made public in 1916, they might have saved Casement from the gallows, and that could have altered the bloody course of Irish Home Rule. Now, a century on and in the hands of Kerry Museum, it's a chance for the public to judge their rightful place in history and the drama that played out on their doorstep all those decades ago. London, and the International Antiquarian Book Fair. Not the usual place to find a curious set of old spectacles.
My goodness, I didn't know you looked so good.
But then this is no ordinary collection. Spanning a remarkable 2 centuries, it gives us a unique insight into human history. It's owned by former banker and antiquarian book collector Bernie Lauser, but had originally belonged to a German optometrist.
What's special about the collection is that it spans the time from the late 1700s to literally today. You can see really how the tastes have changed and how even functionality has changed throughout the years.
Barbara and Tommy both went to see Dr. Black. Dr. Black examined Barbara's eyes and found she would need glasses to help her see better.
When it comes to the practical use of glasses, historians are in no doubt about their value.
The development of spectacles was really important for our social and industrial developments, particularly because of its contribution to education. It allowed school children to be taught from books and to read the blackboard.
He is the man who knows just how to help Barbara see better.
But what started as just a visual aid became a must-have fashion item. It all started back in the 14th century. Spectacles were a rarity, used only by scholars and monks.
The reason why spectacles are so closely associated with the religious houses is that they were literate, because all of the early spectacles were for reading purposes only.
So basic were the early glasses that users would have to hold them in front of their eyes, as this painting of a cardinal in 1353 shows. With the development of the printing press in the 15th century, more people learned to read and the demand for glasses rose. With it came centuries of change in their design, although many people still preferred the ancient art of nose balancing and turned to the pince-nez, literally, to pinch their nose.
They resemble outwardly the early nose spectacles of the medieval period, but with a crucial difference.
What's unique about these glasses is that there's a spring in there which allows you to put the glasses right onto your nose, and it's held in place by that spring. And I mean, it still works today after all these years.
The popularity of this design reached its zenith in the mid-19th century, in part thanks to their talisman, American President Teddy Roosevelt. While Bernie's collection contains fascinating historical examples of early eyewear, it's his speciality designs that are more eye-catching. Like this, a pair of mid-19th century surgeon's glasses.
This is a very, very early example, 1830s, 1840s, okay? You have his own glasses. He was probably farsighted or nearsighted. And then you have the magnifying glass set in front of it. So he was able to basically have his own glasses so he could see, and then of course the magnifier that lets him see just yet a bit better.
Today the designs are more state-of-the-art, but the principle remains the same. small magnifying lenses mounted on a surgeon's own glasses. The war years of the 1940s saw a shift in the production of specialist glasses from small to large scale as survival became uppermost in people's minds.
It is actually a set of spectacles that would have been worn under a gas mask.
These were made, of course, by both sides in the war. They were mass-produced. There were entire factories given over to their production.
With 5 billion people, that's half of the world's population, expected to need glasses by 2050, Bernie's rare set of spectacles has, for a brief moment, offered us a remarkable insight into 200 years of social history, from literacy to leisure. In an auction house in Bristol, preparations are underway to sell a collection of war memorabilia. Among the items, a macabre-looking World War I mask.
It looks pretty gruesome, but actually the reality behind it is probably far more gruesome than actually the object itself.
This crude visor was hastily designed for one thing and one thing only: survival in the face of the German enemy.
This isn't just a rare item that you're dealing with, this is an entire human story.
You hold it, as I'm holding it now, and it comes to life. It suddenly becomes real that this person wore this in a fighting machine in a war, and it was their form of protection.
The man behind this extraordinary mask was tank driver Charlie Boyce. A century on, and far from the battlefields of France, it's now being sold by his granddaughter, Suzanne Harris. This mask not only tells the story of human survival, but of ingenuity and innovation in the killing fields of Western France. When war broke out in July 1914, politicians predicted the campaign would be over by Christmas. But within months, there was stalemate. Both sides had set up trenches and dug in.
The mobility of war, which was critical to achieving strategic effect, disappeared. It's called trench deadlock. Once you dig trenches, everything comes to a grinding halt. And it was essential to find a way of breaking that deadlock. How do we actually break through these front lines that are stretching from Switzerland to the Belgian coast? There's no way of going around the enemy. You've got to punch a way through. You have to find a new tool to restore mobility to the battlefield.
The solution? The Mark I, the first operational tank in the world, and initially used at the Battle of the Somme in September 1916.
The Royal Navy, it has to be noted, not the British Army, invented the tank as we know it today, a track-laying, armour-plated vehicle armed with machine guns and cannon, which could cross over trenches without falling in them, and was impervious to the fire of machine guns. It was a pretty crude piece of equipment, lozenge-shaped vehicle. It was designed purely to get across the maximum width of trench without falling in.
While this British invention led the field in World War I, other countries like America were rapidly developing their own prototype armoured machines. This M1917 6-ton light tank was a copy of the popular French Renault FT design and proved the most effective. And while it was mass-produced in the States, only a handful made it to Europe before the end of the war. Back in Britain, this new battlefield weapon needed crew, and ready to volunteer was a young Suffolk lad, Charlie Boyce.
So this is Charlie with his football team, 1912-1913. At 16, he wanted to join the war effort, so off he went to Hildon in London and joined the tank regiment. So we're talking probably another 2 years, and he's World War I driving an army tank.
Made out of boiler panels bolted together, working conditions inside this new war machine were unbearable.
It's a hellish environment inside. It's unbelievably hot. These vehicles have no suspension, so as they go over broken ground, they're lurching from side to side. It's banging and crashing. And every time something hits the outside of the tank, bits of the rivets fly off the inside, so there are bits of metal whizzing around inside the tank.
While the tank afforded a shield against enemy fire, it could be a death trap for those inside. To protect themselves against flying shrapnel, crews wore leather jackets, helmets, and this, the archaic-looking splatter mask.
The splatter mask is a remarkable reuse of some very old technology to solve a new problem. This is a totem of modernity, and yet it's essentially made of leather and chainmail, so it could come off a medieval jousting field.
I've got the chainmail piece here, which actually, under my fingers, is quite weighty. You can see here underneath a very soft leather. It would be soft against the skin, but you can see around the cheek pieces where it's obviously been worn and used. And this very soft leather is actually covering a metal frame which is encased in the two areas of leather.
The tank crews almost certainly designed this themselves. Chainmail was being used on the Western Front as body protection. They didn't make this stuff fresh. They took pieces that were already there and created these things. So this was invented on the job by the tank drivers and then mass-produced back in England.
Today, these splatter masks are considered rare. But during World War I, all soldiers in the tank corps are thought to have been issued with one. It wasn't just flying shrapnel the crews endured inside the tank. Excerpts from Charlie Boyce's personal copy of this book, Tank Tales, gives us another insight into the atrocious battlefield conditions he faced.
First of all, there is the danger, the knowledge that the moment a tank appears, it becomes the target for any gun the enemy can bring to bear.
The engine and exhaust system give off poisonous fumes. It's a very unpleasant place to be, and your human endurance inside there is low.
Shells bursting nearer and nearer until it seems inevitable that the next must crash through the steel, wreaking death and destruction within.
A few hours and the crew will be completely exhausted and quite often comatose. And if they're not rescued, they will die. This is an appalling environment, truly appalling.
Thanks to tanks and crewmen like Charlie Boyce, the stalemate across these World War I trenches was broken. Charlie survived the bloody 4-year war and went on to work as a porter in a pharmacy and as a volunteer air raid warden during the Second World War. And the fate of the splatter mask? That was quietly put away and only discovered decades later by his granddaughter.
This was in a drawer in their living room, and it was kept in the drawer alongside a single bullet, which apparently was tradition, as in the one that missed you. So these items they knew were there, but it was never discussed. It was just their dignity that they know what they suffered and didn't wish to impose it on everybody else.
After Charlie died, aged 77, the mask was packed away in Suzanne's attic.
Where do you want to be, please? I can start this with me.
With nowhere to safely keep it, the family now wanted to go to a new home.
Lot 50, the one everyone's waiting for. I've got interest everywhere here. You will not see another one of these. Fair warning.
The mask went to a private collector. And while the public have only had a brief chance to appreciate it, its historical importance will live on in the stories of Britain's first tank crews.
These objects allow us to recover the past and to relive the experience of those that took part in it. They are a window onto an experience of an age now past.
Important historical objects can turn up anywhere, at any time. It takes an expert's eye to know what they're looking at and how important they are.
One of the most amazing things as a historian is finding something that's never been seen before. It's completely thrilling.
Today, auctioneer Chris Albury is taking delivery of a trunk. He's hoping it contains a goldmine of Queen Victoria's personal belongings.
This was collected for valuation and assessment for potential auction. I don't know the full story yet, but I know that either through this family or some of their ancestors, there's a direct connection to Queen Victoria.
Victoria came to the throne in 1837 and reigned for 64 years. Her influence across the British Empire and a quarter of the world's population was so far-reaching, they even named an era after her.
But like Coca-Cola, she's a brand that's universally known around the world.
So anything relating to her is highly prized.
We can thank the movie camera for this priceless screen souvenir of the Victorian age.
Back at the auction house, it's a tense moment. The trunk's been in private ownership for more than 150 years. And Chris has no idea what royal treasures it holds.
Something wrapped in paper here, a little bonnet, a complete assortment of material. A few doilies and cloths and handkerchiefs, not connected to Queen Victoria. We're not getting a clear picture yet.
There are two basic problems to clothing. Number one, a lot of the clothing simply doesn't survive. It's perishable, it falls apart. Number two, how can we prove it's actually that of the monarch? Unless it's actually embroidered with Victoria's monogram, it is pretty much impossible to say, well, this wasn't just simply a dress of some Victorian elite woman.
No monogram, so no royalty connection.
So far, it's proving disappointing.
This is a whole bag here.
Could this bundle contain what Chris is looking for?
That's very exciting, a pair of Princess Alice stockings.
Finally, the trunk begins to give up its secrets.
Oh, look at those. Gloves worn by Princess Royal and Princess Alice. Packet here marked gloves worn by King Edward VII. 2 pairs of socks, as new condition as worn by Princess Victoria.
Queen Victoria, until September 2015, was Britain's longest reigning monarch. She presided over the Victorian era, flowering of industrialisation, the railways, and by the end of her reign, she ruled over a quarter of the world's population. And what was so vital about Victoria in terms of securing the monarchy was the way in which she used this domestic idyll, the image of the perfect domestic family, her, Prince Albert, and the 9 children.
Princess Victoria was the first of the Queen's children. Albert, later King Edward VII, and Princess Alice quickly followed.
Maybe Princess Alice are a bit smaller than Princess Victoria.
The size of these clothes suggests the children were very young, which dates them to the 1840s, the early part of Victoria's reign.
This is looking very exciting. This was worn by King Edward VII at Windsor Castle. He was then Prince of Wales. So this was Edward VII as a small child, worn by him in 1844.
He would have been 3 years old. And this copy of a royal painting confirms the tunic's provenance.
There's Victoria and Alice and future Edward VII wearing this costume.
While the 170-year-old tunic, gloves and socks are important finds, it's still not the prized Queen Victoria memorabilia Chris is looking for.
When it comes to royalty collecting, they want the monarch.
But so far, Chris has found nothing belonging to Victoria. Until now.
Aha, a pair of gloves. Gloves worn by Queen Victoria. That's very exciting. Stitched chamois leather. Look how small her hands were. A stocking with a royal monogram. VRI, Victoria Regina, and Empress of India, as she would have been then. Absolutely immaculate condition. Perfect. Gundry and Son. Literally, boot and shoemaker to the Queen. There's a strong demand for this kind of material.
This is such an exciting find. It's so rare to find a piece of clothing that was actually Victoria's, and every piece gives us a great insight into Victoria the Queen.
And the finds keep coming.
Petticoat worn by Queen Victoria. There's very little to see in the way of damage. Well, it's museum quality. It's you're not going to find a better example than that. That's as good as you'll get.
It's turned out to be quite a collection of royal clothing.
Victoria gave her clothes to members of a very small circle, and then the clothes were kept within their family and went down through history.
So how have they ended up in this box? The connection is Windsor Castle, Queen Victoria's principal residence, and near to the home of the Bagster family, well-known publishers of multilingual Bibles. Eunice Bagster, the family matriarch, had struck up a friendship with Victoria that lasted until Eunice's death in 1877. All the clothes in the trunk have come by direct descent from Eunice.
Legend has it that on the eve of her 100th birthday, Queen Victoria called in on Eunice with a bunch of flowers to wish her well. She allegedly knelt by Eunice's bed herself to be blessed by Eunice rather than the other way around. But sadly, Eunice died during the night. It's known that Queen Victoria gave clothing to friends, family, and beyond her death, and the connection is made. These are the Queen's shoes.
The royal provenance confirmed, it's down to Chris and his colleague Susanna Winters to catalogue the clothes for auction.
23 centimetres. What's that in shoe size?
3.5. Quite small for a petite
Yes.
lady. This I think she wore when she was quite young, because the waist is actually quite small. If we measure the waist, you'll see it's about 26 inches.
Though we can't say which specific days she wore these specific items, it's nice to know that probably in the 1840s she was wearing these. So she either had very small children around her or was about to have her first child, and her whole 60-year career as a monarch is ahead of her. Thrilling.
A treasure trove of shoes, gloves, stockings, a petticoat and tunic, all belonging to Queen Victoria and her children. Together they are worth thousands of pounds, and for the first time they are about to go up for sale.
Lot 364, petticoat belonging to Queen Victoria, on the phone, going.
Hidden away for over 150 years, several of these items have been bought by the historic royal palaces for display at Queen Victoria's childhood home in Kensington Palace.
It's great because these clothes came into a private collection, they went to an auction, and now they've gone back into the royal collection. So it's like they've come full circle. It's like they come back home. The public will be able to come and see them, these unique items that have been hidden away for all these years.
The sale of these remarkable pieces marks yet another chapter in the continuing tale of trading history.